So I'm going to start off in this one by applying some masking to those cliffs in the distance to retain some of that almost salmon color, which is a mixture of the burnt sienna and a little bit of red, alizarin crimson, but very, very faint. Might be a touch of yellow ochre in there, maybe a touch of orange, but very little. So the masking gum, when it's dried, can be removed with a very light touch of the finger, and it actually will open up sections of it, and it kind of breaks up in a random pattern. So it makes it nice for applying some color on top, and then you get a little bit of texture from that. It looks very rocky, very craggy, and once that's dry, then you remove a little bit more. You can apply some more color, or just take it off altogether and reapply it. I'm putting it on pretty thin, but I'm actually right here. I'm actually painting. Painting light is essentially what you're doing. You have to think almost in reverse. So the areas that you're working on, of course, are going to be lightest, and you're trying to retain that. So now this stuff can be controlled to a degree, but it really isn't the same as like a liner brush or something where you can get a really fine point on it. You can drag it around with like a paper clip or something, but there's all different ways to control it. When it's dried, I like that process for these kinds of textures. Just thin coat and just really lightly running my finger across the top and seeing what comes off and exposing paper. And then if it comes off in a pattern that looks correct, then I can paint over that. I've done it a lot on beach scenes where I wanted to create the look of, like pebbles on the beach. And it works great for that. As opposed to, like just spattering. Gives you a lot more control. So if it doesn't come off the way you like, and it just exposes an area that doesn't, feel good, it's not the right shapes or textures, then just take it off altogether and just go back to your typical painting, or you can reapply it and try it again. But it can mess with the paper a touch, and it picks up the color underneath. So if you're too heavy-handed with it, you could have some accidents that you weren't, banking on. Like it can be used sort of as an eraser to eliminate some of the dark tones if you've got too many. And over light areas, it just makes them a little bit lighter, which is fine because you can always go darker. It's pretty hard to go the other direction. So that I'm using it mainly in the distance in this painting. I mean, I might use a little bit in the trees that are in the foreground for bark, but other than that, I don't see myself using it for anything else than a barrier, like I to put a barrier around the frame for the door, which still has to be changed. The perspective of that door isn't correct, so that'll get fixed. So that's my approach right here. I keep trying not to jump ahead and not to go dark and try to, get too heavy-handed. The doorway itself has a window in the door, and then of course it's open so you can see through to the canyon, and I need to kind of be consistent with what I do across so that it all ties together. You don't want one color scheme within one section and then skip over another and all of a sudden it's something different, because it's not going to work for your background. It's going to look peculiar. You're going to go, what's going on back there? So need to be aware that the colors I'm using here on the left side are going to extend on through. And I frequently use hair dryer just to hurry up the drying. And it doesn't have to be bone dry a lot of times, but for the using the masking gum, it should be pretty dry. And you can go too heavy with a hair dryer too. You don't want to bake it on there because it doesn't want to come off if you do that. So just a little fooling around with it, experiment a little bit with it if you want to use it. If you're kind of a detail freak like I am, where I kind of enjoy, looking at a painting, and if it grabs me and it pulls me back in, I like to see what's going on way in the distance. And of course, our eyes are only capable of so much, so it doesn't make sense to get too specific way off in the distance, like 11 miles or 20 miles away, because our eyes can't do that. Cameras maybe can, if they're the right lens, or binoculars or something, but our eyes don't function like that, so I don't want to create that in a painting. I don't want to do super sharp focus on something that's way across the canyon. So now I'm going into the open section of the door, and just preserving a little light along a ridge. And I usually pick out those, where the light's going to strike first, and then I, daub some of this stuff on there, and then I will put in some shadow color, which has been up to this point alizarin, Prussian, some Payne's gray, and various browns added to that, just to bring down the intensity. I don't want high chroma color going into it. Alizarin's a great color to recede into the darkness if you don't have too much of it. Even burnt sienna in small amounts works pretty well for that. But kind of working toward the purple with the alizarin and the Prussian together, that seems to recede as much as anything. And I've kind of stuck with that all the way through this. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm going to be working myself all the way across, and I'll go up to the top of the canyon rim and do more detail there, and then I'll try to delineate some of these formations of big rocks, huge, and also the canyon walls. And then there's, of course, a valley that I have to create for the river, which just drops down into the darkness. And it's going to be one of the darkest accents in the painting. I'm going to speed things up a bit and play some music, and you can watch my hand get going a lot faster, and we'll get back together later in this, and I'll comment on anything new and different that I'm trying to accomplish. So here I've got some resist material on the cliffs in the background, and I'm finding different combinations to just kind of scrub over the top. And for this kind of application, it doesn't need to be very wet. And a lot of times you can just kind of drag the old brush sideways across in the direction that you want the pattern to go, the texture of it, and it will break and leave little bits of white. But right here I'm putting on there's a little bit of a pink hue throughout all the earth that kind of comes through, and then I usually keep that very light and maybe quite a bit of water to begin with, so it doesn't become too strong, and everything goes on a little bit darker than you will see it as it dries, which is a good thing. I tend to scare myself and think, oh, I got too much pigment here, and then as it dries, it typically lightens. I'm picking out a few little valleys and shadow areas to darken, but I have to kind of proceed with caution there on wet paper because it'll spread out and you won't be able to control it. But overlays of color throughout this painting are what gives it a deep, kind of in the shadows in particular, will give it a kind of a depth that you wouldn't achieve just with one wash. And in the deep shadows, you're going to have some blues. You're going to have a little bit of alizarin, and probably I'm using Prussian or sometimes indigo, which is a really, really dark value, and combinations of those things and building up layers to create some of these shadow areas. And I don't want to obliterate all of the earth tones either. I mean, I don't want to make it something that just punched up with blue, but there is some blue in it, and blue recedes in shadow areas typically if it's the right kind of a blue-gray, like a Payne's gray, and that helps to create that depth. And I'm working in this window space on this door, and I've actually corrected the perspective at least across on the bottom. And in the top, I'm going to deal with that also because it's a little askew, and I've got some resist material across it which will be removed, and then I will change the cliffs at the top, and it's going to work. The resist material is just there to lighten the paper so that when I take it off, I'll be able to extend that dark and make it more like the cliffs on the left and on the right. Then I'm going to continue to work across, and I'll work on the area to the right of the door, and that's actually where the river comes through and kind of goes back and forth, and there's a lot of cliffs in there, very jagged, a lot of rock, and that's catching some light. So that's sort of this is a morning light. It's coming in kind of at a low angle, creating longer shadows and very distinct shadows. Had this been the sun was overhead, it wouldn't have nearly as much drama to the lighting, which this is what I was hoping for, the kind of day that I got anyway. Not necessarily the painting because we're not there yet, but so far I'm pleased, and I've been taking my time, obviously. If I didn't speed some of these videos up, we'd be here forever, because I just putz along. And as I'm painting, I'm listening to music or listening to the radio, and I get up and stretch, and I come back, and I'm fiddling around, cleaning things up, so I'm not sticking my elbow in a mess. And I found that in the studio, if I don't have things arranged the way I want them, I can't work because I'm preoccupied with it, and I'm like, where's the placement of the water is just off camera here, and the other all my paints. It's not very frequent that I have to go and get more paint for the palette or fool with it, but I'll clean the palette here at some time. You can see that sometimes I'm drawing some lines to check on the colors that are in the palette to make sure they're not too contaminated, and also give me a good idea of what they look like, just without any combination, just straight out of the spots. So yeah, I almost always will, when I create some kind of concoction, I always test it out because I don't want to have to deal with lifting it if I put it on my painting. And about 99.9% of the time, I'm using some combinations of colors, earth tones. There's just basically nothing that comes straight out of the tube that works for me. It's always a little too much. I'm kind of a colorist anyway. I like a lot of color, but I don't like the synthetic looking color that you can sometimes run into when you're just working straight from one color to the next. Now, I mean, sometimes you allow them to mix on the paper, but more than likely, I'll make a mixture in on the palette itself and make sure I know what I'm going to get when I put it down. That way, I'm not using blotter paper or anything else to clean up my mess. So this continues for some time, and I typically will work from light to dark because obviously you can put in a lot of light and then paint over it without too much difficulty, but you can't go the other way around. If you're gonna do all of your darks first, you better be real sure they're where you want them to be. And I have a drawing here, but it's a complex space, and I refer to the photos frequently, and I found that if I put down a light earth tone in the or tones in the area where I'm going to be concentrating most of my efforts for the next, let's say, half hour, if I get that light down, and then I can delineate to an extent where the real deep shadows are next, and then kind of come back with the midtones. So I kind of go light, dark, and then mid, and then beyond that, even some detail with like a liner brush or something. And that seems to be my system here. It doesn't, it's not 100%, but that's pretty much what I do most of the time. And you'll see too that I'll work for a while and then it can get lost. So what I'll end up doing is getting a hairdryer, drying everything, removing all of the masking material, which is the art gum, and that really tells you where you're at. And then if I need to, I can reapply and get out the hairdryer if I want to speed it up. But you can't bake that stuff on, or you have difficulty getting it off. Yeah, so it's just kind of a rinse and repeat. At times you feel like you're just drawing, but really there's a lot of things that occur, of course, in watercolor You put the water down and you combine the colors that you've made on your palette, and magical things can happen. Sometimes it's awesome, and you have to then decide, oh, I'm keeping it. I'm not going to touch that area. I really think it's cool, and I don't want to mess it up, and I just want to retain it no matter what. And that happens, and that's really fun when that happens. And then there are other times when you think, well, yeah, that's fine, but it certainly needs to be, pushed back a little bit, or the color needs another layer to create an adjustment. So then you're just waiting and letting it dry. Or, oh, this area I like the color, but there's no delineation. I can't tell what's going on. It's a little confusing. And that's that's one of my key points is, does it make sense visually? When I'm trying to decide whether I'm really have completed an area, am I satisfied with it? That's the key question. Does it make sense to me? And if it does, and I like the color, then I'm pretty much finished with that section. And it's something that the more you work in this medium, the more you get to know when is it time to call it enough, and you can overwork these very easily. You've heard the expression less is more. Yeah, that's true most of the time. And then again, there's a whole lot of times when you have an area that is close, but it's just lacking a little something, and a little bit more work, if you're careful, can really improve it a lot, or bring it back from the garbage heap sometimes. And I find I'm sometimes put on a little too much pigment, and I'll do some lifts in this to, just getting a mop of a brush and picking up. I'm picking up right here because I want to kind of create these cliffs that have the different layers, and they kind of move across laterally on the cliffs, and you can see when you're close to them, you can really see it clearly that there's delineation of all the geologic eras by color, so keeping that in mind. I'm not a geologist, but this is where a geologist would come in handy, I think. Well, they obviously do work a lot here and give you a lot of information about what kind of formations occurred during what millennia, and I learned a lot about that, but of course forgotten most of it. It was fairly technical, but just the enormous amount of time that it has passed to create this incredible canyon is pretty awesome. So if I'm trying to talk geology, I'm going to flounder like I have been. So I think I better get back to painting. I think what I'll do now is speed this up a little, play a little bit more of Mr. Brandt's compositions, and then I'll come back and discuss anything that occurs of note as I keep moving across. Hopefully, I'll be down to the bottom of the door here in an hour or two. We'll see.